I'm so thankful that you could meet with me today and allow me to share with you about the nature of God. We've been talking about the book of Genesis and how in this beginning book, God is explaining to us who He is, that He's the Creator. And because He's the Creator, He has the right, the authority to make limits and boundaries and rules. And even though He's making those boundaries, He's just and He's fair. And because He is the Creator and has that authority, He has the authority and right to threaten us and carry out those threats if we're not obedient to those. But the question really is, and always as we discuss this, will we have faith in Him? Do we trust Him? Do we believe in Him? Will we follow Him? We talked last week about what our greatest fear is. And I know one of our fears is, will God provide for me? Will God help me? And so I want to share with you today from Genesis 21 through 24, 3 separate stories that answer the question, will God provide for me? And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, let's just, rip the Band-Aid off. Yes, He will provide for you. The question is, I want you to look at these 3 things as 3 different circumstances, 3 different situations in which God shows that He will provide. Now, the first circumstance is what I'd call the tragic circumstance. It's a situation where you're in desperate need. You're in a very difficult situation. Your back's against the wall. It's life or death. And will God come through? Is God capable? Will He come through in those kind of situations? Now, this story is about Hagar and her son Ishmael. So, if you recall, we talked about Abraham and how God promised Abraham that he and his wife Sarah would have a child, and that child would be his heir and inherit the land God had promised them. But they were getting really, really old. They were well past childbearing years, and their faith they were struggling with it. And in one of those times when they were struggling, they came up with their own plan instead of waiting on God because, didn't think God was going to come through. And so they decided to have a child through a servant girl. Her name was Hagar. The child was Ishmael. And, this was not God's plan. And after the fact, it became a real problem. Let me show you how it kind of developed. Sarah said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. So after Sarah had her son, there was all this tension between her and Hagar and the firstborn and the secondborn, but the secondborn was the promised child of God, all that kind of stuff, and so there was tension. She's like, get rid of it. And he does. He literally sets the boy up on Hagar's shoulders, it says, and gave her a thing of water, sent her off into the desert. And she goes off into this desert, and eventually they run out of water. They're just seeking civilization, and it gets to the point where they're at the point of death. And she sits her son down under a tree and goes off and says, I can't watch him die. And he's crying under that tree, and it says that God heard the boy crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what's the matter, Hagar? Question is that, what's the matter? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. And when we talked about this last week, what are we afraid of? It always drives us, right? Don't be afraid. God's with you. God will provide. And then there's this miraculous moment. It says God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. And so she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. They survived. They kept traveling. They found civilization, and things turned out okay for them and turned out pretty well for them, as a matter of fact, even though they were abandoned. So the question I have is, where's the miracle? Did God just create a well out of nothing, or was the well there all along and she just couldn't see it, and He unveiled it so she could see it, made it apparent to her? Did God not guide them then to the right spot where that's where the well was, and at the right moment showed it to her, and just miraculously she ended up where she was supposed to be. And consider, God is providing and rescuing them. This is not the chosen child. This is not the favored one. This was not the plan. This is the misfit. This is the other one, the undesired one, the leftover one, the left behind one, the cast off. And yet, God provides. So the question, does God provide in the desert with no water? Does God provide in the tragic circumstance? Will God show you a way out? Can you find a way in God when there is no other way, when there seems to be no way? And I just want you to know that no matter what your circumstance is, no matter what your situation is, no matter how dire, no matter how difficult, no matter how impossible, that God knows where you are. He knows your situation. He hears your cry. And God will provide. Trust Him. Listen to Him. There's a well of water in the desert for you. Now let's look at the second situation. That story's in Genesis 21. Let's look at Genesis 22. We'll call this the test of faith. Now, this isn't about a tragic circumstance. This is about a test. So this is about the chosen child. This is Isaac. This is the heir, the future, the one who's been promised, the one who will inherit, the one who God had made a covenant with Abraham and showed him, like, look at the stars in the heaven. This will be your descendants, and it will be through this boy. This is the child. And so Abraham treasures this truth. He treasures Isaac. And so the test is, will you give me what you treasure most? So we talked about last week that, what am I most afraid of? Well, many times what we're most afraid of is losing what we treasure most. So the question is, from God, am I number one? Do you treasure me most? Well, it's really easy not to, especially when it comes to our children and things and people that we love, but that's what God required. And it seems kind of crazy, but that's why God was asking him. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. And God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, that area. Doesn't tell him a specific spot yet. Go to that region. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. It's crazy. What do you mean? The interesting thing about this is God had made a covenant with Abraham. So Abraham truly believed that Isaac was the child, the heir. So how do you reconcile that he's the heir, that God's made a covenant, he will not go back on his word, and now these instructions? What is God doing? What is God going to do? Like, I don't get it. I thought if I followed God and trusted God, it'd be a smooth path. This seems contradictory. How do I handle that? We actually know from Hebrews 11, and I'm going to skip a verse and show you that. In Hebrews 11, verse 17, it said, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. And verse 19 said he reasoned that God could even raise the dead. So it's as if Abraham's like, I can't reconcile this, but I know Isaac is the child, so if he's asking me to sacrifice him, then his plan must be to raise him from the dead. He had such belief, such faith, that God would do what he said, and God had made a covenant with him that this is what God would do. So this is the test. God asks us for things like, do you truly love him? Is he first? Can he trust us with even more, with even greater? I don't know what it'll be for you. It could be money. It could be resources. It could be your time. It could be risking failure or risking embarrassment. It could be your comfort. It definitely could be a relationship. It definitely could be your children. Would you give up things and people and situations that mean so much to you because God means more and you trust Him. He has said He will provide. He has said He loves you. He wants best for you. He has said He will not leave you or forsake you. He's promised you. What will you do? Well, we know in verses 7 and 8, as they got to the place, they gathered wood, and Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Father, yes, my son. He said, the fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham answered, God Himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And they went on together. Now, in my mind, I picture that Abraham had many conversations with Isaac about he is the promised child and the miracle of his birth and why they're so old and having him and how God had miraculously provided, how angels had come to tell them, and God had made a covenant, and he probably sat out and showed him the stars and says, God says, this is the number of our descendants, and showed him the land. This will be your land, son. And they'd walked the land, and in this moment saying, I don't understand what God is doing, but you are the promised child. Don't worry, have faith. And it's this incredible moment that I can't even understand. But I know in this moment that as he prepared to offer his son, God opened his eyes. And there was a ram caught in a bush. Now, I'll ask the same question as I did about the well. Was the ram always there, or had it miraculously appeared there? Was it there and had been quiet and still the whole time? And now God shows him that it's there, but it's just in that moment. I also picture, everybody wonders, it says that as he began to down thrust, that the angel stopped his hand. I always picture, Abraham was old. He's over 100 years old. He's a really old dude. And he is, I'm picturing being old. Maybe it's my back. I don't know what happened, but he stopped him right at that moment. And then he heard the ram. God provided. And in that moment he knew, it's not that God's going to raise Isaac from the dead. God spoke to him and says, no, here I am providing. I wanted to see, would you give me what you treasure most? And I know now that I'm number one. And I just want you to know, God will test you. But the question for us is, will God provide what you need when He has asked you to faithfully give up what you have? Will He provide the substitute, the replacement that is actually a better choice? Will He provide this thing for you? Or is it too costly for you to trust that God will provide? In some ways, it's easier to trust God in the tragic circumstance, even though we're hurting. But this is a different kind of hurt. Will we trust Him to give up something? I have what I want and what I need. This circumstance, I don't have it. Will God provide? I have it. Will I give it up for God? Let's look at the third circumstance. The third circumstance is about the basic troubles of life. Sometimes it's not this big test of faith. It's not this tragic circumstance. I'm just in life. I'm trying to pay the bills. I'm trying to get something repaired. I'm trying to get a vaccine during a pandemic. I'm trying to have a happy home and be a healthy person. Maybe it's even bigger than that. Maybe I'm trying to find a house. I'm trying to find a job. I'm trying to find a spouse. What is it? Well, in our story, it is about finding a wife. Finding happiness and joy and the right person. It's about finding a wife. Now, in their culture, usually the parents would play a huge role in finding a spouse for their child. Well, Abraham is elderly and he has a tough situation. He lives in this area where the people all around his land are pagans. They don't worship the Lord, and he is vehemently against his son marrying a pagan woman. He wants her to marry he wants him to marry a girl who's been raised right, She trusts the Lord. She knows the Lord. He knows the difference that will make. And so, but in order to find that person, he needs to go back to the area where he grew up, where people worship the Lord. And it's a long journey, and he's old. He can't make the journey. So he sends his servant. What a job for this guy. And he tells him, I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I'm living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. All right, so the servant asked, well, what if I can't? What if I go and I find somebody, but she's not willing to come because she hasn't met your son, and, they're not willing to let her come? What if she's not willing? And he said, okay, second rule, you are not taking my son away from this land to go get her, okay? Because this is the land that God has promised. So she has to come here. So you got to go find her, and you got to bring her here. Well, this is the ultimate blind date, right? Like, how is this going to go down? Can God, we always want, how am I going to find somebody, I live in this, small town, or what, how's this going to work? Is God so tied up? Can God not find somebody? Can God not help you find the job, the whatever, the things we're looking for? Can God not do those things? That's the question. Will he? So, the story is the servant goes. He travels all the way. He's praying, Lord. And he gets to a well in that hometown area, and he says, Lord, show me a sign. Bring me a woman who has the right attitude, a servant's heart, that she'll give me water when I ask for it as a traveler. And she'll also water my camels. Now, that's a lot of water and a lot of work. So she's got a good work ethic. She's servant-hearted. Show me that. Sure enough, that girl shows up. Her name's Rebecca. And she's also beautiful. And she offers him water. And she waters his camels. And then he says, tell me who your father is and who you belong to. And turns out she's a member of their family. She's a cousin, And so he goes back and tells the story to her father. And, and amazingly, she's willing, like I said, the ultimate blind date. This is the ultimate blind proposal, right? She goes back with him and marries Isaac. And so I want you to know this. She was raised right. He was looking for that. She had the good character traits. She was servant-hearted. She was also beautiful, plus, right? She was willing. She had faith. She heard the story of how God was providing, and she believed in that provision and believed she was part of that provision. So, who knows? Maybe she's praying as well for that spouse and that person and that, so will God provide? Not just in emergencies, not just in the examinations or the tests of life, but will God provide when it comes to issues of peace and joy and happiness? And God will provide if we'll trust him, if we'll follow him. God has many names in Scripture. One of those names is Jehovah Jireh. God will provide. And so I just wanted to give you a message of encouragement today. I don't know where you're at. I don't know if you're in a very difficult circumstance and you're pleading, crying for help from God. I don't know if it's because you're in good circumstances. You just have a situation. You're wanting something. You want something else. Will God provide that and provide it in a great way? And maybe you're in such good circumstances that God's trying to test and see, but are those things taking the place of me? In all of these circumstances, what God is trying to say to us in the book of Genesis, he will provide. If you truly let him be number one in your life and you trust him and you follow him, he will provide. I think the hard part for you and I is it's not always, when I want him to provide. It's not always the way I want him to provide. It's in ways that I don't see. But I trust that in that moment, God will unveil my eyes and show me the well of water. He will show me the ram in the bush. He will show me the bride-to-be at the well. Will you trust the great provider for your life? My prayer for you is that you will. May you look to him this week to provide for you.